All right, we are going to get started with our event tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at tonight's town hall to talk about Proposition 127, a little bit about the Colorado Wildlife Federation. So we are a nonprofit here in Colorado. We do a lot of advocacy work for public lands, some education to get more people outdoors, and a lot of other great wildlife outdoor adventures. Tonight, we are hosting a panel of a lot of really fantastic wildlife experts who can help us navigate kind of some of the questions we have around Proposition 127. In some of our communication with supporters and donors, we know there have been some questions that people are not quite sure and they just want to talk to somebody. And so we thought it would be great to bring everyone together now and actually speak to the experts. So due to the amount of registrants we have, we are going to keep questions into the chat. We just don't have the time or the manpower to open it up for a verbal discourse. However, if your question tonight is not answered, we will send this recording out along with other information, and you can always reach out to me, Madison at coloradowildlife.org with more questions, and I can direct you to appropriate resources. Again, I kind of mentioned it. We are recording this tonight. So if you're a little nervous about showing your face, go ahead and turn that camera off. Or if you're very brave tonight, go ahead and turn it on. And we will share this recording with more resources after this as well. So I go ahead and start dropping your questions in the chat. Because we have so many people, if you could keep it to 1 or 2 questions to start, that would be very helpful for the moderators here. If they are speaking and you have a follow-up question, drop that in there and we'll try and make sure it's answered in a timely manner. So to kick it off, I would like to introduce Tim to get us started.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim Emery. I'm the Issues Committee Chairperson with CWF, and kind of had this idea to put this together along with Madison and Georgina and another gal that we have as part of our group that really wanted to get the message out to CWF, because I think it's really important that you guys know the facts of what's going on with 127. Um, We've got some amazing people on the CWF board and the CWF Issues Committee. I would guess probably on the Issues Committee, we have 100+ years of resources that have been with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and DOW before that, and they are just a wealth of knowledge. I also want to have Dan Gates. I'll be introducing Dan Gates. He's Dan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you've got so many darn titles that I can't even comprehend how many titles you have in the industry. And I've known Dan Gates for probably 15 years. I sat on the Colorado Wildlife Council with Dan a few years ago. Really a great source of resource. We also have Rob Firth, who was a DOW sheriff. And Rob, I'm going to let you do your own intro as well. And then I don't see him, Ron Velarde, who is up in Glenwood, I think Glenwood Springs area. But when I knew him 30 years ago, he was checking my fishing license 2 or 3 times a year in the Glenwood Springs area. So great resources. So Dan, I'm going to start with you, and can you just give us kind of an overview of who you are, and then kind of a quick overview of what 127 is about, and kind of what's happening with the situation out there. So we've got to unmute Dan.
Cool.
There you
go. Got unmuted. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody's participation this evening, and welcoming us to try to lay out some of the groundwork of what our position is on 127, not only just from the campaign side of things, but what we believe the only side of things when it comes to the science-based wildlife management. I'm the executive director for the Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management, whose mission is to enhance, promote, and defend the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management. I'm also the chair of the Issues Committee for Wildlife Deserve Better, which is the Issues Committee opposing 127. And as Tim mentioned, I've got a plethora of other things that I've been able to be participatory on over the course of the last 15, 18, 20 years at a variety of different levels, appointed by some of our governors, some of our directors, and being able to sit in different positions of hopeful influence about educating about the North American model, science-based wildlife management, and the practical application of that. And I've been on many, many different boards with CPW, many different committees, and I'm a wildlife control operator, and I have been doing that for the last 37 years. So while I don't have a degree in wildlife biology, I do have 37 years of plus experience on human wildlife animal conflict type stuff. So, and that just doesn't happen to do with squirrels in cages in somebody's attic, but it's a wide variety of different things, from the commercial and agricultural and industrial side of things. And that has to do with habitat modification, threatened and endangered species, exclusion and deterrence, translocation, sometimes lethal removal, depending on the circumstances. But we are doing what we can to maintain the science side of what Colorado Parks and Wildlife does. We stand behind that wholeheartedly. And while we might have questions or disagreements over the course of my career to some degree, I would rather leave things up to the experts in the field as opposed to any other options that are available, unless somebody has a better method besides the public opinion. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan and Tim. Rob, we'd love for you to share a little bit more about yourself as well and your background in the work.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted. Are you hearing me? Okay. Thank you, Madison. And thank you all for joining tonight. I think it's of great importance for everyone to try and educate themselves prior to the November vote coming up. I'll share right off the bat that I intend to vote no on 127. I've been a professional wildlife manager going back to 1983 when I began my career with the Colorado Division of Wildlife. Great day for me to get that job. I was a district wildlife manager for a number of years. Then I became an area wildlife manager. And I finished my career as a chief of law enforcement, kind of chasing bad guys. And so we had forensic teams, and we would go after the worst violators of wildlife. And oftentimes those folks were into other bad stuff too. But bottom line is, I've been a professional wildlife manager. When I left the Division of Wildlife in 2008, I took a job with Trout Unlimited for about 5 years as a project coordinator. And then I retired again for a short time, and I became a professional ranch manager for a conservation ranch, a large ranch up in the Middle Park area. If you drive Highway 9, you've probably been on the wildlife overpasses or underpasses. That's the ranch I worked for. I managed that until COVID hit, but I've had pneumonia 3 times in my life, so I had to give up the management portion of it, and I'm still a consultant for that ranch on wildlife issues. I take a great deal of pride in having managed wildlife at all those levels for the state, especially. And I can tell you that as a chief of law enforcement, I got to travel to both Midwestern conferences and national conferences. And Colorado was a leader nationwide as far as how we did things. When we had something to say, people sat down and listened to what we had to say and often modeled their efforts after ours. So I take great pride in knowing that I came through an agency that was top of the line as far as management. And now you add that back to the mountain lion management activity that has occurred since it's been listed as a big game animal going back to 1965. Mountain lions are thriving in our state. I've heard statements and I've seen ads now on TV, people saying, well, lions are, they can manage themselves. That's true to a point, but you could say the same thing about deer or elk or any other species. If humans disappeared from the planet, those species would not suddenly go extinct. They all manage themselves, but they'd eat themselves out of house and home. They'd have population extremely high, and then it would tank and dive and maybe take 20 to 30 years to recover. Mountain lions will need to be managed whether we have legal hunting or not, and the cost associated with that is great. So district wildlife managers that are trained professionals are still going to be called in to handle lion issues. And so I just want to impress upon the audience tonight that comes at a cost. And I guess the best way to do that is to suggest to you that when wolves were brought to the state of Colorado, the guesstimate on cost was about $800,000 tax and tip. And now we've exceeded 5 million. And we've only had 10 wolves put on the ground, and we're about to get another batch. So those costs of managing are high, yet there is no way to recap any of the funding associated with wolves. And we're about to go into the same concern for lions. If we lose the ability to sell licenses and gain income, then we don't have the ability to pay the people who do the management. So again, I guess I'll leave it with a statement that's basically wildlife should be managed by the scientists, the professionals that are trained in it, and not by activists. It's an emotional issue. I understand that. Not everybody hunts, but not everybody, prepares the burger with a live animal. I mean, you just go to the McDonald's and order it. So there are those who hunt and those that do not. I'm not trying to convert anyone into hunting. I'm just going to say it's a tool of management, a very good one. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll gladly take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob. And then finally, one of our speakers tonight is Ron. So Ron, if you don't mind unmuting and letting us know a little bit about you as well. We are starting to get some great questions in the chat, so we'll just keep on going.
Got it? Okay. My name is Ron Velarde. I live in Grand Junction. I worked for the Colorado Division of Wildlife and then the Colorado Parks and Wildlife for 47 years. So I was started as a conservation aide, was lucky enough to get on as a wildlife conservation officer, then became additionally, then that was a wildlife officer. And then I was an area wildlife manager. And then from there, I became an assistant regional manager in the Southeast. And then I became the regional manager for the West region. At that time, there were only 3 regional managers. So I was for the whole West Slope. And so I will have to say that, and I just want to point out first initially, and you've heard it and you're going to hear it again, ballot box biology is a bad policy. It's bad for wildlife, it's bad for our citizens, and it's bad for sportsmen. We need to leave those decisions to the researchers, biologists, the wildlife officers that all have degrees, and the decisions that we had made in those times weren't made overnight. There was a lot of discussion, and when we make decisions on management of wildlife, it's a science. It's not an art. And one of the things that I keep on hearing about is, first of all, I just want to point out that I am going to vote no on 127. That's me, and hopefully my family. I'm just trying to think of so many things that I want to say about why ballot box biology is bad. And first of all, I understand it's an emotional issue. Rob has brought that up, but it's more than emotions. One of the things that I keep on hearing is, oh, if by harvesting mountain lions, we're helping chronic wasting disease. In fact, if there is no wildlife mountain lion seasons, it's not going to help chronic wasting disease one bit. That's a fallacy. There is no science that says that mountain lions will eat chronic wasting disease deer only. That's not a fact. And I've heard that I've seen that in op-eds in all the newspapers. And it's just not true. There's no science that says that. So what you need to do is think about it. It's like I said, it's a management decision. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and the people that make those decisions are truly managers that know what they're doing. So I'll just leave it at that.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everyone for being here tonight again. I think we're going to have some really great conversations. I would like to dive into some questions right now. We've got a few going. Just to let everybody know, I am trying to hit the thumbs up if I see it. So if you drop a question in and you don't get a thumbs up from me, go ahead and post it again. And I might not go in order of how everything has been posted, but I will get to your question. So for our panel tonight, I think a really great question, and it's come up in some of our discussions, is the T in cat, so trophy hunting. Can you talk more about what is trophy hunting? Is it even happening in Colorado? And what is going on with these big cats when they are hunted as big game?
Dan, let's have you take that one.
So while trophy hunting, the term is subjective, I'd like for somebody to be able to explicitly define trophy hunting, because it doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female or a young animal or an old animal. It depends on when it's harvested and who harvested it and how they would determine it to be a trophy. We've heard people say in the past, and I've been playing in this arena for the course of the last 20 some odd years, that if you take a picture of something, they deem it as a trophy, and it's bad. If you turn around and save the byproduct of something, such as a doe deer, for an example, and you harvest the meat, and then you want to salvage the extracurricular parts and pieces, that would be a trophy. We look at that as no different with those things as you do with mountain lions or bears or any predator for that matter. Things that maybe aren't a specific trophy to somebody might be a trophy to somebody else. But is that really a definition of trophy hunting? No, I think trophy hunting is the easy catchphrase that individuals utilize for their own gratification to try to turn around and bastardize the people that are buying the licenses that go out to harvest something. And I use that example freely because if you go to my house, yes, you will find game heads on the wall. But there's game heads on the wall that do not have antlers. There are animals on the wall that do not have any relation to somebody's classification of trophy, because that was a specific animal that was harvested or was a 3D memorial or a memorandum of understanding of what we do when it comes to wildlife management and what we do for the resource. Now, anti-hunters, they don't agree with that. I haven't run into very many people that would understand what our definition of trophy hunting would be. Their definition of trophy hunting, according to the measure, is intentionally killing, wounding, stalking, pursuing, or entrapping a mountain lion or bobcat. Intentionally killing or wounding is hunting. Intentionally stalking or pursuing is hunting. It's not trophy hunting. If you look at the measure specifically, there's no mention about size or maturity or age classification outside of the species that they're questioning about this particular issue. And I know that there's people on this call that will think differently about what I'm saying. Some of those are actually on the cat's side of the aisle. I don't have a problem with people having a disagreement about the definition of certain things. But when they try to classify what we do as sportsmen and women, and then turn around and put everybody into this same pot because somebody did something or whatever, I think it's a degradation to what the North American model is and what the intent of science-based wildlife management is. And better yet, I think that those people don't fully understand. And if they do understand part of it, great. But I'd like a definition from somebody at some point in time of what they're specifically trying to accomplish when they utilize the word trophy. Trophy is something that is maybe it's taken somebody a long time to achieve. Maybe it was an exceptional quality animal that was able to achieve. But look, I know guys that have gone lion hunting for 7 or 10 or 12 or 15 or 18 days over the course of 3 years and still never harvested a lion because and not to say that they didn't maybe tree a lion or have the opportunity to, but they didn't harvest it because they were looking for a specific mature animal. And if somebody deems that to be trophy, well, then I guess maybe some of those guys are trophy hunters. But for whatever reason, they could do the same thing if they were hunting possums in Mississippi or snapping turtles in Alabama. It doesn't matter about the definition itself, except for there's no definition of trophy hunting in state statute, and the way that it's defined in this particular measure would actually define hunting as a whole. And the interpretation of that moving down the road would be easily decipherable or distinguished by legal precedent or by maybe a preemptive strike of individuals trying to capitalize on something that we don't think is even right to turn around and try to talk about things. It's obvious in our concerns about this specific measure that the definition of trophy hunting included in the measure is not the true context of what they're trying to accomplish when they're talking about the proponent side of 127. And we feel that down the road, you hear the saying all along, the camel knows under the tent. It's easy to turn around and take one thing and turn it into something else just because somebody else's interpretation or definition of it
So to follow
And-
up with that question too, can you describe, to get a permit in the state of Colorado to go mountain lion hunting, what needs to be done with that animal here? Since trophy is such an ambiguous term, what are the steps to follow through with that permit? Like, can they just take the skin and walk away?
No.
Right.
No, and I think the deciding factor of that, and I appreciate the question, especially Madison. Mountain lion hunters, prospective mountain lion hunters, need to be able to take a online class or a test, and then they have to be able to pass that test with an 80% success. And that once they do that, they can turn around and purchase a mountain lion license, and then they have to be able to be determined. It has to be determined if where they want to hunt is still an open area, and there's a quota and a bag limit for each one of those areas. And each one of those areas can be closed at any given time by Parks and Wildlife, depending on if they're getting close to the quota. And that quota, for example, might be 2 lions or it might be 30 lions, depending on the geographical area or the population density. Once they harvest that mountain lion, if they're successful, which not all of them are, as some people allude to, that's a 100% guarantee. There's a 19% success rate on mountain lions last year. 500 and some odd lion hunters went out with a 19% success. There's 2,500 lion hunters went out with a 19% success with around 500 lions that were harvested. When they harvest that lion, they have to take that lion in to a Parks and Wildlife individual or an office and get that head and hide, if they have it there, and the carcass itself to be inspected. The carcass has to be prepared for human consumption. Then there's a tag or a seal that's inserted into the hide that Parks and Wildlife has checked it. The carcass tag itself stays to the meat. And that's a distinguishing factor, because when Parks and Wildlife actually does the inspection and they take their samples out of it and they take a tooth out of the skull and they turn around and do the geographical locations and they do their data analysis on their apps that they have now on their phones, which it used to be just all paper trail. There's a tag that goes onto the hide that does not have to be turned in, but often does, because it's a salvageable part or a piece, just like a deer hide to make gloves out of, or just like elk ivories to make jewelry out of. Those are things that the sportsmen and women have historically done over the course of time. But there's 2 tagging requirements that go on that, though, if you want to have that hide tanned or taxidermied, which then somebody would classify as a trophy, there has to be a tag attached to the hide to make sure that it was legally harvested. And then you turn around and have the carcass tag that's attached to the meat. Those are determining factors of legal harvest, and it gives Colorado Parks and Wildlife the ability to make an educated decision on what they're doing on a regular daily basis as those quotas are matched and how those data is compiled during the course of the season and in preparation of how they're going to alter or modify and adapt their management objectives for the upcoming season.
Great. Things that I really like that you said there too is they have to, because I think when I first heard about this, I thought, oh, they're just taking the hides and stuffing them. But what I really like that you pointed out is they have to be used for human consumption. Like we're not here to waste animals. And I do have a wildlife biology background. And so I love also how there is research being done as well. Like harvesting these animals and then CPW coming in and taking like hair, tooth, blood data, like it's all for science. And so how all that works together. So thank you for talking through that.
Thank you.
I think this leads well into our next question from Mark. If lion populations won't grow out of control and deer populations won't plummet, what is the basis for supporting a no answer?
Maybe Rob, you can take that.
I'll try. Can you repeat the first part of that question? You said if, go ahead.
If lion populations won't grow out of control and deer populations won't plummet, what is the basis for a no vote?
The basis for a no vote has more to do with managing every individual species. There are places where deer populations are in great trouble. There are populations of mountain lions where they're very difficult to control because they're near metropolitan areas. There are deer in backyards in many of the Front Range counties, and unfortunately, we get more and more reports of mountain lions also in these same neighborhoods. And so If you say if the mountain lion population won't plummet, is that what you said?
Mhm.
Grow out of control, rather. That's one way to look at it, but there's a possibility that the mountain lion population doesn't need to grow out of control because the problem may move elsewhere. I live and reside in managed wildlife in Middle Park, which is just over the Continental Divide from the Front Range. We were often surprised at how many male lions showed up in our harvest because it would seem like our local population couldn't produce that many. And yet we were getting a spillover effect from Front Range lions whose males will overlap with females by about 1 to 5, 1 to 6 males per 5 to 6 females. If those lions have 2 kittens per year and some of those are males, well, they're going to leave the territory of that dominant male or succeed him. But the ones that leave go elsewhere. They're found in the communities of Lakewood and Golden and Evergreen and places like that. But they also come over the Continental Divide and they're found in Grand County. So well, you don't have that population grow out of control. It's a growing population, and many of the lion populations in Colorado continue to grow. Do they grow outrageously so to the pace where they're going to reduce lion or do their prey populations? That's a misnomer. It's hard to imagine that predators can control prey to the point where they drive them down. Now, if the prey population is low, they can certainly impact or prevent, say, a deer population from recovering. We're seeing that now in Middle Park, where our deer and elk populations are at all-time lows, yet that's the place where wolves were released recently. And we're concerned now that this should impact, right now it's unfortunately an impact on domestic cattle and sheep, but with additional releases and growth of, packs, the one pack was removed, but over time, we will see an additional apex predator that's in our community now of ungulates. Lions don't necessarily have all the control. They're one of several predators that impact big game herds. And then by the same token, I think the second part of the question had to do with, and if deer don't, what was the second part of the question? I want to
Yeah,
make sure.
if mountain lions increase, but it doesn't make deer populations plummet.
Okay, well, it may hold the population down, keep it below objective or impact it to the point where it can't recover to, say, an optimal amount. So those are concerns managers have. But yeah, I don't think we base a deer population on the fact that mountain lions can control it for us. Never have.
Right. And I think
Hey,
it's also really important to point out too, how even with regulated hunting, mountain lion populations are still increasing.
Yes, they are.
hey, Madison,
Mhm.
we have Jerry Apker on as well. And Jerry, if you wouldn't mind saying a couple things real quick. Dan informed me you were the carnivore specialist for CPW for a long time. Kind of give us what your thoughts are, especially on that question.
Yeah, so can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. So my name's Jerry Apker, and I started working for Colorado Parks and Wildlife in 1979 and worked through field as a district wildlife manager and then an area wildlife manager. In 2000, I became the state's carnivore specialist or carnivore biologist and started working on both mountain lion, bobcat, lynx, wolverine issues, those kinds of things, and started helping the state develop its management protocols that have been adopted over time and improved by the current staff. So I retired in 2017, and I've been kind of out of the game since then, but jumped in back when this ballot initiative came forth. I am a no vote, so I just want you guys to know that going in. The question about the effect of mountain lion predation on mule deer populations, at least all of the data that has been studied shows that on a broad scale, mountain lions do not cause or are not the controlling factor on mule deer populations. Habitat, health in the community, disease control, those things play a larger role than mountain lion predation by itself. That being said, mountain lion predation, all kinds of predator-prey dynamics are complicated. and they aren't like butter spread over toast, and it's all the same everywhere. And it's not all the same for all species either. So in general, they aren't going to have a huge impact on mule deer populations, but in local places, they could have an impact on mule deer populations. They could also, and this has been proven time and time again, in bighorn sheep populations, particularly desert sheep and more isolated bighorn sheep populations, isolated meaning that they're isolated from other bighorn sheep populations. Mountain lion predation on those populations can be significant and can drive populations to extirpation. So I think those kinds of things need to be taken into account when broad scale statements are saying, well, they'll have absolutely no effect on their prey. That's a gross generalization, but it's also a gross generalization to say that, well, they're going to completely decimate deer. It's going to be site specific. And that's why I believe that it's important to leave it to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to help make those management decisions and focus harvest appropriately.
Thank you. Really appreciate that insight as well. To keep us going on to our next topic, this question is coming up quite a bit. So we have one that mountain lion hunting is done using dogs by rounding up a big cat under a tree, then shot, correct? Wouldn't you say that method is cruel? There ought to be a more humane way to control big cat populations. And then a follow-up with hunting dogs don't distinguish older animals versus young mothers. Neither do they pass any hunting tests. So should they be used as hunting tools?
Ron or Dan, do you want to handle that?
Go ahead, Ron.
Not all at once.
Is Ron still muted or is he available?
Yeah,
There,
he's there.
I'm unmuted now, right?
Yep.
Well, I saw that question being asked, and that's a good question. But one of the things I will say is that they're right. Dogs can't distinguish young males, old males, females with cubs or whatever. But first of all, most, not all, but most mountain lion hunters have outfitters. And outfitters make their money by selectively picking the mountain lions. So the outfitters know the difference between a male and a female. They know the difference between a young and an old one. And a lot of hunters, they're saying, I want this type of a big lion, or I don't want, for sure it's illegal to kill a mountain lion with cubs if they have cubs. So the distinguish is it's not the dogs that are picking out the mountain lions. The dogs tree the lion, and then it's up to the outfitter and the hunters as to make the selection of what type of mountain lion they want to harvest.
How do those outfitters figure that out?
Can I add to that?
What was that, Tim?
How do those outfitters know the difference? Are they observing them? Are they looking at their tracks? What really, and Rob, maybe you can help that out too. How do they know the difference?
They can tell by their tracks, but they also, keep in mind, these guys have been hunting lions for 10, 15, 20, or 30 years. They know the difference between a young lion and an old lion, and they understand females. So, that's their job. That's why they're outfitters.
I'd add this. I know there was a study done, and it was information I provided to a outfitter just getting started here. It was measuring track size and stride length before you even turn out the hounds. So oftentimes, if you find multiple tracks, that's a female with kittens. Outfitters won't turn out their dogs. They don't want to have that incident happen. The professional ones don't do it. Certainly, they can get onto a track of a large tom and get crisscrossed with that of a female and kittens. And so you do have situations where young lions can be treed, females can be treed, etc. But the outfitters are also aware that there's a quota. And they know that when they exceed, generally it's 40% of the take with females, that unit is going to shut down. So they seek out large tracks, male tracks with a stride length over 40, 42 inches, generally speaking. And when they can measure that and do that, they'll turn out and they'll usually tree a tom. And that's what hunters want to see anyway. But the fact that they do utilize dogs helps them be selective. Even when they get a cat in a tree, there are ways to age and sex, and that's part of the education requirement on the lion permits that was mentioned earlier. When hunters want to, pursue lions, and it's the most heavily regulated big game species in the state, as far as I'm concerned, they have to pass a test and understand and know how to sex a lion that's in a tree or whatever through various means. They also have to know how to identify a young lion versus an older lion, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of education that goes with it. And it's much like using dogs to hunt other game. It's a tradition that's been handed down, but it makes the ability of the hunter to be very choosy and or the outfitter to ever even turn out on a given track, so that those incidents that were brought up in the question happen very rarely.
We have a follow-up question as well. There is no female sub-quota for lions in Colorado. There is no requirement to not shoot females. Is that true for those?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here. I don't know who.
Go right ahead.
That's all right. Go for it.
Yeah, you're allowed to take a mature or adult lion of either sex, a male or a female. But what we've talked about earlier in the management aspect of it is when females start to creep up in the total quota, that will determine next year's number. So if you harvested 10 cats this year, but more than 4 of them were female, oftentimes you'll cut that quota back and you'll cut it back to 6 or 8 the following year, and then you'll proceed accordingly. If you start to take more males in the harvest, you can let the quota creep back up. But again, we're talking about a population of lions in the state, and I'll defer to Jerry Apker or others on the call, but lions are managed intensively for that reason. They want to make sure that we have a healthy, robust population of lions, and therefore we're very quick to, or at least CPW is very quick to, apply the science to it and make sure that they're conservative in their management efforts. Certainly they take into all kinds of consideration if there are nuisance lions or problem lions in outlying communities or nearby communities, but they watch that quota very, very carefully. But yes, you are allowed to take a female lion as well as a male.
But let me throw in, Rob, just for clarification. There's not any species that Colorado Parks and Wildlife manages that at some point in time there isn't a female harvest allowed, specifically on the big game side. There's doe antelope, there's ewe bighorn sheep, there's cow moose, cow elk. And so those are how the management is done over all of the big game species, not just on mountain lions alone. And so those perspectives go into a variety of different things that people just don't look at, especially when they're concentrating on one particular species.
Excellent point.
All right, and apologies, just scrolling through the chat to make sure I'm getting everyone's questions. So here's one that I think we have also internally chatted about, and it's what's going on in California. So we have a question. How long has this or similar issue been in place in California, and what are the results that we've heard about or seen?
I'll jump on that.
Great.
It's been going on since the early 90s and actually at different levels far beyond that in California. And while there's different perspectives about the who, when, why, what, where, and how, I think it's impractical for people in Colorado to compare to California all the time. But California has a wide variety of circumstances that they've had to deal with just because of the way that they manage their wildlife there in the human population. From my understanding, there's roughly 29 million people in the state of California. Well, Colorado has roughly 6 million people. You hear numbers all the time about what is harvested and what is not. But what I can say is that mountain lions have still died in the state of California. At what rate, depending on who looks at what specific demographics or geographics or, comparative from year to year or for whatever reasons, mountain lions have continued to die in California because they will continually be managed in some capacity, but not through hunters, not through hunter harvest, not through objectives to try to make populations sustainable or increase or drop them down or whatever. they're managed on a conflict resolution basis, same as what I do from a wildlife conflict resolution side of my business. The objective is not to kill everything, but there's a fact of the matter that people turn around and kill things in California through government harvest of conflict resolution animals. But the harvest in that capacity doesn't go into the management of those mountain lions. It just goes into the conflict resolution side.
So the scientists lose that data, and like the animal is essentially just lost because it's just to be removed. We're not getting anything from it.
Yeah, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but there's people that I know in the state of California that are out hunting deer right now, that have hunted deer in California for the course of the last 30 or 35 years. They've seen more mountain lions historically in the last 5 years than they ever did in their entire life of 55 or 60 years old. They're seeing less deer. Now, that doesn't mean that that's straight across the board science. It's an anecdotal observation, but people need to be considerate of what is happening that is proven from offtake of either state trappers or hunters or federal trappers or hunters, conflict resolution specialists, like what we're trying to do here on a variety of different levels. But the impact to individual species is probably more impactful in areas just like what Jerry had mentioned. There's things that will be defined over time, and it's not going to happen all immediately. But California has been in this position for 30 some odd years, if not longer. And there's not anybody there on the sporting side that we can find that is 100% in the line with we did the right thing 30 years ago. The game agency now has turned around and started redoing depredation permits out there, which they didn't do for quite some time. Are they harvesting exactly what they did when they were doing a regulated season? In spots, yes. In other spots, no. But that depends on the human growth and the population density of other wildlife there as well.
Great, thank you. I do have, okay, so we have a question about revenue. So we talk a lot as wildlife conservation, how these permits and tags bring in revenue for CPW. So Julia asks, the Secretary of State data says that lion and bobcat tag sales bring in just about 0.4% of CPW revenue. Do you agree that the revenue these tags bring in is accurate?
You want me to take that, Rob? Ron?
I haven't followed the money part of it. I know there was a fiscal note attached to what we would lose. And you can look at just what applies to the state. What I don't know is if we have a figure to total up the cost for district wildlife manager time, biologist time, or other professionals within CPW that have to handle mountain problems, or mountain lion problems rather, in towns and communities where they finally find a mountain lion in someone's garage, or it's killed a Cocker Spaniel, or whatever the case may be, and what the cost is associated. So I don't know that lion income from licenses exceeds that 0.4%. And I don't know that that figure would be something that would be substantial enough to cover. But I certainly know that if we lose the 0.4%, there's no way to regain that and have that apply to the cost of doing the management on lions and other species as well. But I have not seen that 0.4 figure, so I have to do some research to come up with that. But I'll defer to anyone else on the call that maybe looked into the fiscal part of it.
Dan.
So the fiscal part is if you're just looking at the license sales by themselves, but if you look at the trickle down side of the license sales, you could extrapolate that in a variety of different manners, whether you include the ancillary components of what sportsmen spend when they turn around and come into state, or if it's a person that's actually here and they have their dogs and they have what they do on a yearly basis. I mean, I think it's hard to quantify at any level, but what I would say is just because only a certain amount of money is generated by one specific species, that doesn't mean that we should stop, turn around and trying to regulate it and create a season. Sandhill cranes don't provide any money to this agency to make any difference. Neither do band-tailed pigeons. Bighorn sheep and moose and mountain goats do, but not to the numbers that you would think, just because of the available licenses that are there. If that's the reason that we're going to stop hunting just because it doesn't generate money, then I think that maybe our priorities are maybe a little skewed in one direction or another.
Right.
And I this is Ron. I agree with Dan it's not about the money. It takes a lot more money to manage bighorn sheep than we actually get from bighorn sheep revenue. So it's not about the money. It's about, but it does matter if you can, if you continue to decrease the revenue. Right now, the Parks and Wildlife is fully funded by sportsmen and or other avenues, but sportsmen are paying the bill. So it is important. I'm not saying the 4% is going to make or break anything.
Great. Let's go back to the research. We had a follow-up question when we were talking about mountain lion tags. So Dean asks, so if CPW was not able to collect scientific information from mandatory tag checks, how will the loss of hunting impact the agency's ability to predict what populations of lions and bobcats are doing?
It's a good question. I can tell you that right now we have, and I think maybe Jerry ought to answer this because it is about the data that we collect. We get data on every mountain lion. Once we don't have that data, it's going to be interesting to see what's going on. Right now, we are doing research, but maybe Jerry has a better answer to that.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and unmute Jerry and see if he can help us out with that.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. So right now, when a mountain lion is turned in, I don't know if the agency is collecting DNA specific, but they do collect a tooth from every mountain lion that is then sent off to a lab, and they cut it open and measure the cementa annuli, and that way you can get an age. Based on those ages, then you can, and you'll also get the gender when the animal is being checked. You get the precise gender. You can verify it if they have any questions through genetic tests, but usually officers are pretty good at being able to identify gender. And so based on the proportion of males, females, subadult males, subadult females, and the mortality over time, you can begin to tell what's going on with the population, whether the population trajectory is upward or the population trajectory is downward, or whether it's staying more or less the same. So in the absence of hunting, all of that data goes away. You have no information whatsoever. So the only way you're going to gather information then is to do intensive research. And if anybody knows anything about trying to do research on mountain lions, I guarantee you those mountain lions that are research subjects are going to be pursued by hounds. They're going to be treed, they're going to be darted, they're going to be handled then. And all of that gets extraordinarily expensive. When I was working on one of the mountain lion research projects and helping to develop the research plans and all that kind of stuff, we were looking at an annual budget of about $700,000 a year for the cost of doing intensive mark recapture studies on the mountain lion population in a broad geographic area, broad enough geographic area that you would actually get meaningful information. And that's the other difficulty with mountain lions. Not only are they cryptic, but they live at huge scales, which is why the state changed its management protocols from 17 or 18 different management areas to one on the east slope and one on the west slope. That makes tremendous sense to me to manage at those scales. So you simply lose that information, and I don't know where the funding will come for it if hunters aren't ponying up for it anymore.
And again, with like a wildlife biologist background, I think it's really important to point out as well the humane effects of trying to collect data from big cats. I did some work in South Africa with jaguars leopards. And when you dart an animal, it's pretty traumatizing for them. And like you said, your scent is now on them and then they become hunted. So it's not like we can just pivot and have researchers go out and start to, dart, get the data and then let them run free. It's a little bit harder than that. Moving on to bobcats, we do have a question about Does CWF support an unlimited take of bobcats as is currently allowed in Colorado? Or just in general, let's talk about the unlimited take of bobcats that is currently allowed.
Because that was directed at CWF, do you want to answer it or do you want me to?
Go for it.
So while the assumption would be that there's an unlimited take of bobcats, there would be an unlimited take of bobcats if you had 35,000 people out there harvesting bobcats. But last year, for example, there was roughly 850 to 900 cats that were harvested during the season. And while 15,000 people got a small game license and a fur bearer permit to go along with that, the number of cats that were harvested were substantially down from previous years, and a lot of that has to do with just the changing dynamics, or maybe it's the specific year. During COVID, for instance, there was much more people out in the field pursuing wildlife and fishing resources. License sales went up exponentially to the point to where even the application process was way higher than what CPW or any game agency in the country had seen, because people were forced to go outside, and if they stayed inside, they had to wear a mask, so people were looking for things to do. License sales increased, which then in turn put more people into the field, which then in turn maybe created some more harvest on things that you wouldn't have to have a specific carcass tag for. But I've been harvesting bobcats for the better part of my adult life in some capacity. In some years, a lot, in some years, none, in some years, some. What I can tell you is bobcat populations are cyclical to some degree based upon the prey, based upon the pressure, based upon the habitat, and a variety of other things that go along with that. But I've still been harvesting bobcats in the same locations, same geographical locations individually, myself, for the course of the last 45 years. And I've seen populations go up and down, and some of that has to do with public and private property and all the variety of other components that I mentioned previously. The harvest on bobcats, while be interpreted as being unlimited, is not any more unlimited than it is on any other species of high reproduction rate. When something breeds and you have a sustainable population of it, and Jerry can jump in here at any point in time because he was the fur bearer and carnivore manager, but when you have abundant species, abundant numbers of species that have higher litter numbers, and you're going to have a higher survival rate, then there can be an offtake that in some years seems to be high or maybe unlimited to somebody. But in all reality, it's not unlimited. It's just unlimited for that specific person or that specific timeline or that specific year when other people might be engaged in that activity or not. When you get into the prey species of those other animals, whether it's gray fox or bobcats or coyotes, sometimes those animals maybe won't populate as well as what they did previously. Now, we can sit here and argue or determine who's right and who's wrong on so many numbers of things, but just like what I see, why is there a limited take on marmots then? Well, we're not talking about marmots, we're talking about 127. And we could get into a discussion about ducks or rabbits or whatever the heck anybody wants to discuss. But I would still relay back to what I consider to be the experts and the scientists that are making the decisions based upon the hunter information, harvest information that the feds and the state does, based upon the facts and the data that are being supplied to the agency and to the individual managers, and based upon the ability for them to be able to adapt and modify their management objectives on all 78 game species in the state.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Jerry, did you want to add something to that, or? Okay. Madison, you're muted too.
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping up in the chat as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. You had to unmute me. So
You're good. I sent it your way.
okay. Yeah, the other thing to note about bobcats is that there are 5 management indicators that the state looks at, and at about, I think it's 4 or 5 different geographic scales, from the bobcat management unit scale to a regional scale to the West Slope scale and the East Slope scale, and then the statewide scale. And all of that feeds into then making management decisions about whether or not seasons might need to be constrained or additional restrictions might need to be placed on the harvest of bobcats. And thus far, those management indicators have not triggered in any regions of the state. There was one bobcat management area in the extreme southwest part of the state when I first started developing those management guidelines that about 5 years in, it looked like the population was trending downward. And I have since retired, so I don't know what the resolution of that was, but I haven't heard of any additional bobcat restrictions placed in the southwest part of the state. So I'm assuming that those management indicators returned to what are considered nominal levels, so that the bobcat population was at least returning to some degree of stability or increasing. And a lot of that has to do with prey abundance.
Similar with the bobcat vein here. CPW admits they do not have a scientific-based method for bobcat population estimates. So what do we use for that?
I think Jerry just answered part of that, but
Yeah.
Well,
Jerry,
and I can go one step further. So for like mountain lions, I had worked with our folks in the GIS shop, and also then senior biologists across the state, district wildlife managers, in terms of developing what's called, and now I'm going to start talking a little inside baseball here. We developed what was called a resource selection function model for habitat. It took into consideration slope aspect, vegetation cover, density of vegetation cover, took into account prey base, so the populations of deer, elk, bighorn sheep. It did not try and take into account hobby stock or domestic livestock or any of that kind of stuff. The resource selection function model estimated the quality of habitat on a scale from 0 to 100 and ranked the quality of that habitat. And then we made some assumptions about the densities of the lion population that would exist in those different habitats based on research across the United States, Western United States, where mountain lions occur. And that included some really poor habitat areas to some really high quality habitat areas. Now the CPW, I understand, over the last 7 years since I've been retired, has been ground truthing that resource selection function habitat model and the densities that were applied to the different qualities of habitat. And what they found, I was happy to learn here the other day, is that the assumptions that we made back in 2000, whatever it was, were either more conservative or about what they found on the ground. And they're continuing to do those. And they're doing intensive mark recapture in order to develop the density estimates. We did not go to that length on bobcats. We did develop a crude resource selection function model, but it did not try. We had no way of estimating prey base because you don't inventory jackrabbits and cottontail rabbits and pine squirrels and things like that. So there's no way of really estimating prey base. There were some climatology things that we were looking at, but we weren't able to take the steps to go to the degree of having a high degree of confidence in the population estimation from that extrapolation. So what we did was we used the most conservative population density that we found in literature and research bobcat populations that would apply to the median habitat in Colorado. And we applied that across the board in bobcat habitat, high quality bobcat habitat. That resulted in a population estimation of between 15 and maybe 25,000. And so we ended up going with, well, our starting point is 15,000, but it's almost certainly higher than that. Sorry for getting really into the weeds.
No, I think it was very necessary. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to bounce back to mountain lions. So we have a question. Aren't nuisance lions in human habitats very different from non-troublesome lions in their own habitat? Why not just have CPW handle the problem cats as they do now?
This is Ron. Repeat
Yep.
that question again, because that was difficult. I'm
That's
trying to
okay.
figure
I
out exactly
know.
what they're talking about.
Sure. So, aren't nuisance lions in human habitats different from non-troublesome lions in their own habitat? So I think what they're asking here is, yes, we have nuisance lions in human habitats and then lions just living, doing their own. So when we have problem cats in human habitats, why not just have CPW handle it? If I
Well,
got that wrong, Julia, I'm very sorry.
Well, I understand the question now, but I will say that first of all, the home range of mountain lions isn't just like 5 miles or 10 miles. We're talking, they have home ranges, and Jerry, I think, if I'm wrong, I know Jerry will correct me. I mean, we're talking 50, 70, 100 miles that they range. So you can have a nuisance wildlife problem in Evergreen one night, and that mountain lion may be in Estes Park the next day. So when we deal with nuisance wildlife, I mean, obviously, when somebody calls us and let's say it's a predation on a cattle, we deal with that. But that doesn't mean that that same mountain lion, if we don't get it, isn't going to be in Middle Park the next day. So it's hard to say what is a nuisance mountain lion and what isn't. The way a nuisance mountain lion is one that is when it's creating a problem and we handle the problem, that's a nuisance mountain lion. But you can't differentiate between a nuisance wildlife mountain lion and one that we are that they're out looking at it for with dogs. It's impossible.
You know,
Um,
if you think of the geographic area of Colorado, yeah, and I may be wrong with this, but you can't go 10 miles in one direction without running into a road, a house, a building, a power line. And that's really kind of what's happening is our population has exploded over the last 15, 20 years. And now we're running into more conflicts and taking away the ability for CPW to manage these troublesome, this troublesome wildlife is really hard on them. And I don't think we're going to get away from it. And there are more people coming every day. It's not that, we're going to lose people. Colorado is the most amazing state in the country. I truly believe that after my 51 years of living here. But people keep coming in and it's just making it more complicated by the day.
Mountain lions, you take river corridors, those mountain lions move up and down that corridor all the time. And some may be nuisance and some may not be.
Okay, I think I've kind of combed through, but I know some people are still out there with questions. So if I've
So
missed your
Madison,
question, yeah,
do you mind if I just ad lib a little bit on the nuisance side of it?
go
One
for
of the
it.
key components about Proposition 127 is that once mountain lions are taken out of the status of big game, they will not be considered for compensation to livestock, to the livestock industry. And it specifically says that in the Blue Book that the proponents of this particular measure fail to mention. They talk about exceptions to the rule, and there are exceptions in the proposition, but those exceptions remain now. Those exceptions are not being given, they're just being carried forward. And so it says under current law, Colorado may provide reimbursement to landowners for damage to crops, fences, orchards, nurseries, personal property, or livestock caused by any big game species, including mountain lions. Colorado does not provide reimbursement for damage caused by lynx or bobcats. This measure would remove mountain lions from the definition of big game, making landowners ineligible for state reimbursement for any damage caused by a mountain lion. I think that that's another component that needs to be explained explicitly, because while it might not sound like a big deal to somebody on the Front Range that doesn't have goats or sheep or cattle or anything else, if they do, or if they have the ability to turn around and try to make a claim now, they won't be able to make a claim later. And so I see the comments as legislators have been spoken to make sure that compensations will be reinstated. Well, that might be the case, but that's not the immediate case right now. And the intent was to turn around and take all of that out. The intent was to not provide compensation. The intent was to make this not a big game animal to where it wasn't considered a regulated species. And that just shows the intent of the entire measure.
Thank you. Again, yes, if I've missed anybody's questions in the chat, please drop them in again. But we are coming close to our kind of wrapping up time. So if any other speakers want to ad lib, again, we are recording this, so we will share it in an email after this event. I will share my email as well. So if I did not answer your questions appropriately, or if you're still unclear on certain things, you are more than welcome to reach out to me after this too.
Hey, Dan, can you give us a brief summary of what's happening on Friday? And what we can do to kind of, this was brought to us, we wanted to get the word out at CWF and kind of give an example of where you could get some more questions. Yes, I know in the chat it is one-sided. And we chose to do that because we think that this is a good information to get out there to you guys. And we know how our membership and partners at CWF are really concerned about these things. And we really want to kind of explain things to you guys in a non-emotional way. And I think that was really the key to this. But kind of going forward, Dan, what else is there going on? I know we've got a big rally at the Capitol on Friday.
Yeah, there's a rally to oppose Proposition 127 at the Capitol from 11 until 2. It'll probably wind down somewhere around 1, and then by the time you get people off the Capitol grounds, it'll probably be close to 2 o'clock. But we encourage everybody to come, and we'll have some individual speakers, and there'll be multiple organizations that are represented. We know that some of the press and media will likely be there. And we're just hoping to be able to get the word out from our position, our perspective. And I know that not only there's people on this call that are, that are proponents of this particular measure, they'll more than likely be at that rally as well. I would encourage them, if they're so inclined, to be able to come and be able to have a level of conversation that is civil with a level of decorum, and understand that while people have different talking points and different perspectives, that they can understand that maybe we could agree to disagree, but more often than not, that hasn't been the case in the past. And so we're just hoping to be able to educate the general public and to rally the sportsmen and women about the dangers of what we feel Proposition 127 will create, not just from the agriculture side, but from the sportsman management side, and the inability for Colorado Parks and Wildlife to continue to provide a opportunity for harvesting and managing mountain lions and bobcats. And I'll close it with this thing is that all the people that participate in this sort of activity, whether they are the managers that support the hunting and fishing model of the North American model of wildlife conservation and responsible wildlife management, that can be up to debate, obviously, depending on who's looking at what side of the spectrum. We could all nitpick about a bunch of different things, but we would like to be able to turn around and get the people involved that are concerned and that have been historically not only supporting, but advocating for what Colorado Parks and Wildlife does over the course of the last 125 years. And I will emphasize that when people come to the Capitol on Friday, October 18th, day after tomorrow, that they will hear that we support the science and we support the boots on the ground. We support the experts like the 40 or 50-year veterans like Ron Velarde and Rob Firth and Jerry Abker and the other individuals that have dedicated their entire life to this career of being able to sustain wildlife populations, and not just for hunters, not just for sportsmen, but for the wildlife as well. And I would like to leave it on this parting shot. People understanding how difficult it is to manage 78 game species, 961 species of wildlife, with 5.9 million people and 80 some odd million visitors, with a land mass that is still the same, but is being decreased as far as legitimate habitat, has got a task at hand that is harder than most people could ever fathom. I am part of the ecosystem. You are part of the ecosystem, and even the proponents of this measure are part of the ecosystem. For them to discount what sportsmen and women do, or what managers do, or what they do themselves on the landscape, I think is a travesty. I think it's misguided. I think it's offensive when it comes to doing what's right by the wildlife and the resources. And they will have a different perspective in this. But if they decide to come down, or you guys decide to come down to the Capitol on Friday, we would hope that there would be a level of civil dialogue amongst people, or if they just want to stand back under the bushes and watch as an observer, they're more than welcome to do that too, because they will hear nothing else but the truths and the facts, and as opposed to fallacies and lies.
And I believe Jerry also wanted to have a final remark as well.
Well, and I hope nobody takes offense to this. I'm trying to provide a little bit of perspective. So I had two observations that I wanted to make. That when I started working for CPW in 1979, I think they were right at about 2.5 million people living in the state of Colorado. And when I retired, it was about 5.6, 5.7 million. And now I understand we're closer to 5.8 or 5.9 million people. And in that same time, mountain lions went from, probably maybe by the time I started working, maybe 1,000 cats in the state, and now 4,000, somewhere above 4,000 cats in the state. Bobcats were similarly decimated before they were declared a fur bearer, and regulated harvest was put into place, and their populations have increased over time. I think the agency has demonstrated that it's done a pretty good job with hunting as part of the management framework. And it's hard for me to understand why all of a sudden this is sort of denied. People are saying that that didn't even exist, and certainly shouldn't exist in the future if this passes. So that's one perspective. The other perspective that I wanted to share is this notion of that the only justifiable reason for hunting an animal is for population control. I think that's a false perspective. That's a false reality. There are lots and lots of reasons that species can be hunted. And if the only justification for hunting a species or genders of species is for population control, then basically what people are saying is they don't like hunting at all unless it's just harvesting female animals, because you don't need to kill bucks to control populations. You don't need to kill bulls to control populations. And I guarantee you don't need to kill pheasants or quail or even ducks for that matter to control populations. And Rob hit the nail on the head when he said, if you really wanted to look at this and let populations just go and want to see a bunch of starvation and dying from exposure, then that's fine. Deer and elk will take care of themselves too. But we won't have nearly as many on the landscape in the long run. So I think overall, I think the agency's done a great job, and I hope people will vote no, and that the agency will continue to be able to do a great job. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I know we have a few more coming in, but as we are wrapping up, I, again, am going to follow up. Dave, Mark, I know we've got a few things to send your way, and I will make sure that your questions get answered. But again, I really do appreciate everybody coming tonight. This is something new for us, and there's a fantastic feedback in the chat of how we can do better. And we will, because again, like Tim said, we just want to have a conversation of why we are taking this position and what resources we have to share with everybody. So I do appreciate everyone's questions and for joining us tonight and for listening to everyone as well. So
thank you, Madison, for running this, and Georgina. If anybody out there wants to learn more about CWF, please go to our website, learn about it. We're really about protecting habitat, make sure legislation protects wildlife corridors, and all kinds of other different things that are going on down there. And it's really our goal to kind of bring everybody into that fold and help the wildlife and help, people recreate and do what they want to do and enjoy the great state that we live in. So Madison,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Great. With that, everybody, go ahead. Let's hop off, have dinner if you haven't had it yet. I will share this recording with everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.